Okay, so I'd just like to make a quick response video. Um, I recently saw one of your comments and I decided, oh hey, check out your page, and just, thought I'd watch the first video that I came across. So you raised a couple of good points about a relationship between a religious practitioner and the larger system that they're a part of. Um, you basically argued that to be religious, it's not necessarily that you are against, um, let's say, it's not necessarily that the practitioner of religion is against, I don't know, is biased or intolerant, but you say their absolute, their God is the intolerant God, and because of that, um, they're sort of indirectly adhering to the absolute. Or in other words, as you're saying in Nazi Germany, I was only following orders. I don't necessarily think that is always the case. Now, first, I guess you'd have to define what the absolute is. If the absolute is an intolerant God, then yes, that's correct. But then, another interesting question maybe to raise is whether or not the absolute is different according to the particular denomination. For instance, particular denominations may adhere to a different sort of absolute, to use your terminology. This absolute may be much more tolerant inherently than another religious denomination. And I'll give you an example. The I forgot I forgot the name of this religious group in the South. They are the main guys who picket funerals, and they say, these people are going to hell, these people are going to hell, everybody's going to hell. If they're gay, they're going to hell. If they're liberals, they're going to hell. I mean, they have a whole list of people who they are sure are going to be burning eternally. And according to them, of course, I've heard them many times on the news say, look, we don't necessarily hate these people. God hates them. And we're just following God's commandments. And that is just the way it is. This is just a law. It's a divine universal law. We're following it. We're listening to it. And we're trying to warn others to do the same. If that is the case, if you are referring to that absolute, then you're correct. But as far as Christianity goes, the absolute is not an intolerant God. And there are many forms of God according to the spiritual tradition. Not only that, but it seems that God has evolved as we have evolved. Not necessarily that he is really is an entity that is evolving with us, but in other words, God seems to be changing. Our attitudes towards the divine are changing as we change. Now, this raises a very interesting point, because if that is the case, if Christians, say, are becoming more tolerant and becoming less focused on a particular intolerant or basic commandment that is inherently intolerant, some absolute intolerance, then what does this say about the religion itself? Well, it raises some interesting ideas. One, that perhaps it's not a matter of people just becoming more tolerant and swaying from this evil, intolerant absolute. Perhaps it's more of there is some kind of divine experience, and our sensibility towards it is the thing that has evolved with time. Now this basically means that our moral sense and our spiritual and relational sense to the world has become more understanding, being able to relate to different perspectives. What you're basically describing is a very ethnocentric form of religion, a jealous God. But that is not everybody's God. In fact, even if you're Christian, it does not mean that you are connected to that God, because your own people and your own time period may have a different way to translate the same texts. It doesn't mean that the texts are always going to be this sort of intolerant thing. It means that our own attitudes and perceptions have evolved, and in that sense, God has evolved. So, I guess what I would say, the absolute has no good and evil attributes in the same sense as we understood it. It's sort of like, okay, take this for instance. As another example, let's say we are particularly, I don't know, worshiping the sun or something to that degree, and this religion has a very, very positive view of the sun. And somebody comes along and says, "Hey, the sun is really just a ball of gas exploding, blah blah blah." Now, that could change the sentimentality of these people. It could awaken an entirely new worldview of the sun, a scientific worldview. And maybe they would perhaps appreciate that too. Perhaps they would find a way to worship the sun, and that means saying, like, look, it is even this, it is even more than we ever thought. So what I'm basically saying is, it's not that the absolute is evil or good. We have some divine sentimentality, we have some divine inclination. And what I mean by that is, whatever you want to believe, whether or not the divine is real, I would not necessarily take what some spiritual practitioners portray God as being the only view. If you equate all spiritual teaching, tradition, culture, and denominations with particular views, without trying to see some underlying pattern or some underlying structure or greater meaning behind it, that may perhaps expand beyond any kind of particular tradition, even beyond Christianity, then what you might begin to see is what the perennial philosophers saw, that being a more universal inclination towards spiritual practice and spiritual beliefs. So, if you are a Christian, it does not mean you are inherently tolerant like a Nazi. I mean, unless God is a Nazi. To some people he is. To some people he is not. Now, if in the teachings, and if, let's say, Catholics inherently taught certain things, and some of them do, mind you, some of them, the Catholics on the books are against gay marriage. They're not against gay people, but they're against gay marriage, and it can breed hostility and violence. But I would not reduce religion to the violent and the more ethnocentric forms. I would see the religion as an evolution of perception, an evolution of human consciousness, and which has become more articulate as time has gone on, and perhaps more evolved, but only because it has come in contact with other people, and only because that in other areas of the world, human consciousness has evolved through science, through the interaction of many different cultures, through self-reflection and self-critique, and through atheism. Religion has become more sophisticated and more reflective. Now, this doesn't mean that everybody is like that, and unfortunately, most people will not think about these things. A lot of people will be intolerant, and I can see very easily why you would equate, well, look, religion is inherently intolerant, so even if you're a nice person, what you belong to this sort of intolerant force, absolute. The absolute is not intolerant. It may be more like that in America, and particularly in the heartland, but there are so many reasons for it. So, I guess as sort of like a fellow philosopher and thinker, I'm just encouraging a little bit more reflection on the meaning of religion, and some of the best ways to understand it and to get under this sort of fundamentalist mentality is to study religion, not necessarily towards its advocates or within its advocates. I mean, I don't recommend studying evangelical and intelligent design arguments and all this other stuff. You can if you want to, but I do recommend getting maybe into perennial philosophy, things like that, to see the underlying patterns and structures that help make sense and help sort of put fundamentalism not as an absolute, but as a layer and a great hierarchy or holarchy of different evolving attitudes. And this applies not only to religion, to so many things. But at any rate, good videos, great videos. I'm enjoying them so far, and make a response if you want. I will be talking to you.